Jermaine McCubbine, welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for the invitation to come on, Rob. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you, mate. It's a pleasure to have you. And one of the main reasons, there's loads of reasons that I wanted to get you on, but one reason that really catches me is the fact that you've obviously been over here.
Yeah.
And then you've gone abroad into Europe. You haven't gone to America, you haven't gone to Australia, but you've gone to a non-English speaking country, which I think is, firstly, super brave. And the fact that you've gone there and made a success of it, because you've stayed there relatively long term. So yeah, I'm fascinated to get you on and have a little chat about some intricacies of what you do, but also kind of life overseas as a English S&C coach. So thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, absolute pleasure, Rob. Like I said, it's a real privilege to be asked to come on. So thank you.
No, thanks, mate. So anyone that doesn't know who you are, would you mind just giving us a short bio, ending with how you ended up at PSV?
Yeah, no problem at all. So firstly, of course, went through the whole uni route. Actually wanted to be a physiotherapist. So my current position, I'm first team strength conditioning coach at PSV. Back in 2008, I graduated with sports therapy and injury rehabilitation degree. And then after that, I went into some personal training. Couldn't get a job trying to find employment as a sports therapist because it was very difficult because everyone in the footballing world wanted to hire physios. So it was very difficult to get your foot in the door. So I was personal training at David Lloyd's, I believe, at the time, for a number of years. And then, I was pretty much doing the usual, contacting everyone, sending CVs out here, there and everywhere. Managed to get my foot in the door at Brentford as a casual sports therapist. And then from there, it was, okay, see the guys in the S&C department in the gym and, okay, what was this? Made some good contacts, and it was, we do strength and conditioning. That was the first time I heard that term. So it was like, okay, I can combine my sports therapy, injury rehab side of things along with the personal training. It's like kind of a bit more of a complete package in my eyes. So then I started my UKCA journey. From there, became accredited. Then done my master's degree. After that, at Middlesex with Anthony Turner and Chris Bishop. So that was
that's last time you mentioned them two on here. Yeah, I'm only joking. I'm only joking.
I've been paid to say their names. So it was, done my masters, had my UKCA. Then, of course, still being at Brentford at the time, they closed down the academy. So I was part of that whole process of, okay, had a foot in the door, now have to find employment. So from here, I then spoke with the technical director. He was good enough to put me in contact with the technical director at Arsenal, and had an interview. And at the point in time, she was looking for a sports therapist and an S&C coach with UKCA accreditation. So it was, listen, she pretty much said, if I can hire you, I can kill two birds with one stone. And I don't have the budget to pay two people, but I can pay you 1.5 times as much, and you can we can develop from there, which I did. Stayed at Arsenal for a number of years, number of seasons, predominantly starting in the youth. So the Arsenal women's pathway. So starting within the youth academy, setting up some infrastructure within there, and then working my way up to first team, and then most recently transitioning over to Holland. So it was a point of, I had sent my CV. So my wife actually gave birth, and from a family perspective, it was, okay, she's was born in Holland, raised in Eindhoven. So having the little one and no real family connections over here, it was a bit more, okay, let's go over there. There was more infrastructure, more family. I've been coming to Eindhoven for 10 years, so let me see if I can, make something work over there. And I went down and sent my CV to clubs within Belgium, Holland, and Germany. So within their 125 kilometer radius of me knowing I wanted to stay in Eindhoven. And then from there, I think 15 clubs I contacted, 3 or 4 people within each organisation, and didn't hear anything back immediately, and then randomly got a call a few months later saying there was an opportunity at PSV and would I be interested. Naturally jumped at the chance to interview, came over, see the staff, the infrastructure. I had a good meeting with the technical director at the time and the performance director. Was offered the role on a Thursday, and they asked if I can start on a Monday. And it was like, I have to of course move country, but we made it work after that, and that was just over 3 years ago now, so into my fourth season.
So your wife's Dutch?
My wife is Danish, but she was
Danish. Okay.
born over here. Mum and dad were working over here, many moons ago. So that was the connection from here.
So you weren't in Eindhoven when you were applying for the job, but
No.
Did you make it super clear that like we're going to be there?
Yeah.
I'm going to be in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Going to be
so
close.
It was. Yeah. I want to be based in Eindhoven, and being from London, I was traveling for work was never an issue for me. So it was always, whether you was doing private clients or traveling to and from Arsenal from where I was, which was St Albans, would still take you 1.5 hours on the M25. So traveling was never going to be an issue for me. So I set that radius of what I thought was going to be applicable or feasible, and just fortunate enough I got the club that was closest to home.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, when people have asked me, I mean, I've no experience of working abroad, but plenty of speaking to plenty of people that have, and I think the thing that comes across is that you've got to be on the ground. You've got to be there. It's so much easier if you're there. Applying for a job if you're from the UK into the US, it's super tough. But if you're in the US and you've got a base and you're committed to be there, that makes things so much easier. I know you didn't quite do that, but you made it clear that was gonna happen.
Yeah, I think I got quite fortunate in terms of the S&C coach. So I went over as a U23s S&C coach. Then I was promoted to lead academy for 2 seasons, and then worked with Ruud for one season. Then when he got promoted, he took me with him to first team.
Mm-hmm.
But it was
This is Ruud
Van Nistelrooy.
Okay, yep, cool.
So the guy that was in my position at the U23s was actually an English guy as well, who's now at FC Twente. But so whether it was a connection of, okay, we had an English guy who was, maybe it was his way of working, his full process philosophies, and it kind of maybe set precedent and a little bit of a foundation to, they have my CV on file. With the experience that I had and coming from England, maybe that was a little bit more advantageous than some other people that were applying.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Good work. Right. Well, I think, and like I said at the start, another thing that attracted me to having you on the podcast was this kind of hybrid that I knew of your background coming up as a therapist, and then obviously transitioning to S&C, but still bringing that therapy experience and mindset into things. I think you've probably gone about it in a really intelligent way, maybe without realizing that you kind of combine these two skill sets. And I had a guy on the podcast last week called Nick Kane, who runs the Sports Map Network from Australia, head physio at Essendon in AFL. And we were talking about this kind of merger of this late stage rehab grey area where the physios are trying to look to the S&Cs to get that experience of that area. And you've got the S&Cs who are looking the other way and going, I've got no formal education in this area, but I'm looking to the expert physios who have made that transition into that area. And it's kind of this merger, this grey area merger. Have you found that you've got opportunities and found a real niche in that particular grey area, just made it by chance or whether it by design?
No, it's, when I was at the U23s, it was, it's always going to be dependent on the staffing and the infrastructure that you have in place. Will depend on or dictate how much or how early you need to get involved in the rehab process. For me, I'm in my full process, very confident and competent to deliver, I take a player from acute phase all the way through return to train, return to play, to return to competition. So for me, I had, no worries or concerns that I can do that with, soft tissue injuries. Okay, taking someone with an ACL or he's had meniscus injuries, a little bit more complex, and you might get a little bit involved later on. But it completely comes down to the infrastructure. So if you've got one physio, one S&C coach, and you've got 5-6 injuries, then to relieve strain on the department or on your colleague, okay, you're going to have to get in a support. How can you be add some value and help him out to make sure that the quality of the programs are still being the quality of the programs that are delivered are still quality, rather than everyone gets a wishy-washy rehab and then there's a reoccurrence and then you're back into the cycle. So having that blended learning, really gave me the opportunity to get involved and have better and greater conversations to develop something further.
And let's be honest, if you're lucky enough to work in pro sport, the majority of people will be in those kind of environments where you've got 1-1, or you've got 1 and 2, or 2 and 1.
Yeah.
There's not many people who are lucky enough to have a full department, and you can have a real niche.
Yeah.
Like the S&C is predominantly going to be mucking in to do return to play stuff, and like you say, wherever you pitch yourself, depending on the structure of the department, you're going to be involved in the process.
Yeah, you will be.
And the majority of the time, you're probably an exception, but majority of the time, you're learning on the job. You learn the job. You're learning.
I definitely felt that even for myself, because even though once I graduated, even though I had some background in it, moving away into S&C or doing personal training for a number of years, and then coming back into S&C and having that, it was a real challenge to get back into it and be more involved on a day-to-day basis. Because in the youth you would deal with Osgoods or Severs, and there wasn't really an influx of soft tissue injuries. But the higher you go, the more injuries start to present themselves. So it was an interesting contrast. But I had a real thirst for knowledge from the physio side of things, and that's why I went. Even though I had my degree, I went and done the FIFA diploma in football medicine, just to get a great understanding into their thought processes and what they might be doing in an acute phase, to help me rehab the player further.
And we'll get onto a specific rehab a little bit later. But I can't remember, I don't know where the slide came from that I found on Twitter about the hybrid S&C coach. Was that from a presentation, or was that from a paper?
It was. I had a good conversation with I love to network and put some stuff out on LinkedIn. More present on it this year than I have been previously. And a coach from FC Utrecht, which is another club in the Premiership in Holland, contacted me, just asked to have a conversation. And for me, I'm very open for that. So we had a nice chat, and the topic came up: generalizing v specializing, and it just got me thinking. Maybe I should put something on paper just to share for any up and coming or aspiring practitioners that might help guide them in the right direction. I must say that the content I put out was an adapted version from some smarter practitioners than me. So it just added my thoughts onto it a little bit more to bring it a little bit more up to date with some rehab and return to play aspects on it. So
yeah, I mean that we've obviously spoken about the return to play and kind of upskilling in that grey area that seems to be between the S&C and the physio. But one other thing that was on there that always catches my eye, and I think it's only going to get bigger, is the data analysis side of things. Whether it's learning a programming language or it's just understanding terminology within that, so you can, converse with people that are more well versed in that particular area. But how have you gone about that? Have you gone down any route to upskill or become more confident?
Once you work at a club with zero to no budget, you have to be creative. So the first minds at spring is John Lytham, Excel Tricks for Sport,
yes,
Adam Virgil.
So good.
They're the guys that watching numerous YouTube videos to, how can I get an athlete monitoring system up in place to help with the athletes that I have, and also planning on a worst case scenario that if your infrastructure or your systems that you're using in club fail, what can you use that is going to be make sure that the process just ticks over seamlessly? So even collecting wellness, for example, have something in Google Sheets to send on a WhatsApp to all players that you're not missing any key crucial information. So the athlete monitoring side of things, those YouTube videos were extremely influential in those early days, and give you a little bit more clarity and context of how to develop and read and interpret some of the information that's out there. Because ultimately it's about player care, and if we can help and support by putting these systems in place, then you're onto something. Because obviously the cost of some of these athlete monitoring systems are huge, but sometimes the fundamentals or the basics are huge, and can really help you on your way.
I think it's another area that is just going to get bigger and bigger for people like yourself, S&C coaches, sports scientists, rehab, physio, who need to be well versed in these particular areas, because there'll be people in the department who are going to have those conversations, and rather than nodding along stupid like I do a lot of the time speaking to people on the podcast, you've got to understand this language. And I think it's only going to get bigger. And another way to differentiate, I think Dan Howells had put something on maybe LinkedIn or Twitter the other day about differentiating yourself. I think this is a super, not an easy area, but a really interesting area to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's like you want to have great conversations with technical staff, other performance staff, sports scientists, nutrition. So you want to be able to have a seat at the table where you can converse with everyone. But the key thing is, with the athlete monitoring and data analysis, visualization is, asking the right questions to get the appropriate outcomes. So if you do some testing, for example, you want to make sure that the athlete monitoring system you've got in place, what you're reporting back to a player, is adequate. So if we're looking at comparing players, we might use, for example, some bar charts. If you're looking at trends over time, you have your line graphs. If you want to make some comparisons, look at relationships. You're going to have scatter graphs. If you're going to have look at distributions, you're going to have some box plots. If you want to compare performance versus an attained goal, you might have some bullet charts. And then going deeper, looking at some bubble charts or quadrants, and so having an understanding about this, because we are working with the player. We, from an S&C point, okay, this is what I would like to see. How can we put that in place from a visual to make my job actually easier to answer the questions that I have, and then relaying that back to the player so it's clear and concise. So to ultimately save you more time.
Of course.
To do the things that we want to do.
Yeah. So one thing that I want to move on to, and I think this is even more interesting because of where you're based and the kind of players that you're dealing with and the club that you're based at, and that's conditioning and reconditioning players through small-sided games and through other means, not small-sided games. Obviously, Holland is well known for its style of football and has influenced what goes on here in the UK and what goes on all over the world. And I'm just interested how the club philosophy, your philosophy, whether that's changed over time and been in the kind of environment that you're based in, how you're conditioning players, and whether it is small-sided game based. If it's not, what is it? If it's a combination of the two, I'm super interested to get your insights.
It's obviously you have your different phases of the season, and of course you have the head coach's game model, how we would like to play from a tactical standpoint, and what he would require from a physical point of view from our players. So how we're going to press, how you're going to defend, what you want to see ultimately your guys do. Of course, our function is to give the head coach every single player who can deliver the technical and tactical demands with minimal decrement or drop off in performance. So that's clear. Once we're in a pre-season, then there's going to be a little bit more of a shift between off-ball conditioning, so your aerobic, anaerobic, repeated sprint, this type of work to ensure that everyone has a specific baseline relative to what they may do within a game. And then as you slowly get closer towards the in-season, you're following more of a game model where it's infused within the technical, tactical, and within a footballing way. Because if you look at the game, okay, a football, 11v11, 325 meters squared on the pitch. But if you break it down further, it's just a series of small and mid-sided games all over the pitch. So there's 2v2s, 3v2s, 4v2s, 4v1s, all over the pitch, and predominantly in more small mid games. And then once it gets a little bit larger, the players are more shifting, covering, and taking up position to make sure there's no runs in behind, or how to set up the formation to press or defend. So knowing that, you essentially want to train as you play and play as you train. So if we can disguise as much of the running drills within a footballing way, then that's going to be advantageous. Because the big question always comes, what can you not do physiologically? Let me phrase this right. Is physiologically, what can you do with the ball that you can't do without the ball? So knowing that, it's very hard to say, yeah, you get this, or this. So the only thing that I can kind of land on at the moment is, okay, physiologically, you can get similar adaptations, but in a more fun and enjoyable way that has more relationship to the game, which can, drive intensity, ensure that players are, well tuned technically and tactically. But from a performance standpoint, it's still going to be imperative to do specific runs without the ball to ensure that, of course, everyone is meeting their max velocity demands. Because we see that even within a game, on an 11v11 big pitch, that sometimes players don't hit over a 90-minute game. And if you just didn't monitor that, you would see that over time, it could be 3, 4, 5 games before someone, could get some exposure. So we can't afford to rely on that from a performance and injury prevention and performance enhancement standpoint. And also, if you only play those small, mid, large-sided games in a training environment without doing the runs, you might neglect some of the deceleration demands or the high-end frequency and magnitude demands that you might get. So, for example, if you do a 35, 40-meter sprint with a turning point, you're going to be satisfied that, okay, you've met at high entry speed with a re-acceleration. Whereas if you only played small-sided games, okay, the frequency is high, but sometimes the magnitude or the density is not going to be high enough.
That's really interesting that you mentioned deceleration, because we had Damien Harper over at the Speed Conference a couple of weeks ago. And it's interesting that, like you did there, just that thought process is in people's minds more to look at, to quantify and to tick off that, okay, we've done some deceleration work, rather than, and this might bring me on nicely to the top-ups after games. Traditionally, it might be box-to-boxes, but again, that doesn't particularly cover the deceleration demands of what the lads who've played or the girls that have played have been exposed to. So it's really interesting that that's now coming more into the thought process of you guys in the field, because of the work that's gone on from Damien and others that has kind of highlighted it and become more kind of front and center.
Yeah, Damien is definitely someone who, any content he puts out, I'm definitely reading. The same with Tom Dos Santos. Very, very good guys that are putting more content out, because deceleration is, it's one of those things that are starting to take off and be researched and looked into a lot more, because it's such an important part of the game. And if you're not prepared for these high, the game is getting faster. So if the game gets faster, that means we need to have brake harder. So those turning demands are going to increase as a result. So if we don't have the physical capabilities to cope with these demands, then players will unfortunately sustain soft tissue type injuries, knees, patellas, ligaments, everything is susceptible if the brakes are not good. With that good old analogy, you can have a Ferrari and you can drive fast, but if you don't know how to brake and how to control the car, you're predisposing yourself to some negative consequences. So what can we do as practitioners to ensure that you've got all the hardware and all the mechanics and the exposure at both small-sided games, high entry speeds to combat this?
Is that something, again, looking at the lads that don't play on the Saturday or the midweek game, is that something that you're consciously thinking about? Okay, well, yes, we can do the pitch runs after the game, but that's not ticking the deceleration box.
Yeah.
Is that something that you try to do consciously
to
get those exposures?
We would always manipulate. Okay, you have to look at your game schedule. We've just come off the back of playing European football, and on the weekend since pretty much the beginning of the season. So it's only this week that we've had, the last 2 weeks that we've had a 1-game week, which is quite bizarre, or to experience this for the first time is very cool. But from a conditioning point of view, there's more puzzles in a 2-game week because you've got your fixed team, your starting 11, and then those players which are coming in and out and are on the fringes. The good thing about the post-match top-ups, you do them to make sure from a high-speed running perspective, tissue tolerance can be handled, but not every groundsman is going to let you do change of direction type drills, or you get an allocated amount of time before the floodlights go out, or the sprinklers are going to come and, there's ways that they can get you off the field.
Soak you.
Oh yeah, if we can combat and actually do some of the high speed running stuff after the game, but then the +1, the substitutes will go into a training environment where it might be biased towards playing small-sided games or some repeated sprint ability where we're getting high magnitude and high frequency accel decels. So we can afford to keep your high days high and your low days low. So really give them a conditioning session.
I've just got down here disguised running.
Yeah.
And I know it'd be nice to have a whiteboard and some magnets and things to move people around and show us visually. But is there any particular drills that you could use as an example where you're able to get the outcome that you want from a physiological point of view, but you're actually incorporating that into a football scenario, whether it's finishing off with a header, finishing off with a shot, finishing off with some sort of action that makes the player go,
yeah,
I'm a footballer,
yeah.
I'm not a runner. Is there anything that you can describe that maybe you've used to good effect?
Well, today's example, we wanted to achieve a specific target from a high-speed running point of view. So we had, if you think, your 2 wingers, everyone was standing on the halfway line. So you have 2 wingers on the halfway line, 2 central defenders, and then 2 other players in the middle. So you get the ball passed as far into the corner as possible, and then everyone attacks the 16. So it becomes a 4v3 overload. So the guy that has to run towards the ball in the corner, he can be defended. So you've got 2 players which are going to come together. So it's a race to the ball. And then once you get there, can you get the cross in? And then finish in action. And then, foot goes off the gas. And then we play 2 or 3 other balls in. And then work on your finishing. Walk back to halfway line, recover. And then we just have rotations. So everyone's getting, from midline to 16, which is, 35 meters. Everyone's going to get an extended acceleration, reaching some max velocity within that, and then recover and then go again. And depending on what your goal is within the session of how many high-speed running meters you want to achieve relative to game demands, it will vary between player, whether that's 10 actions, 12 actions, 8 actions, 6. So yeah, and then reporting back, looking at the data, it was, so today we done on average 10 actions, and of that 7 were what we 7 of the 10 were in the zone, we could say, and we achieved just below of what we set out before we went out.
If conditioning versus exposure, and they may obviously come together, but if conditioning was the aim versus exposure for hamstring health and all that kind of stuff, would you ever do anything just no ball, look lads, this just got to get this done, and you do like non-football related conditioning?
From a conditioning point of view,
yeah.
So
in season, I mean,
yeah, it's not going to be every time you bring out the ball, because players are smart enough to know, you're just making us run with a ball. So however you try to dress it up, players are smart enough to know. But of course, you're going to have to do your box to boxes, or we have a specific set of runs, so 60-meter runs, which box to box or 60 meters, but some speed exposure, some sprint endurance. So doing this with short rest periods, and then really getting into the capacity standpoint. So of course, you can say a little bit age specific to what you would do within a game, doing say for example 300 meters of high speed running within a 4-minute period. But if you can cope with these demands, what you're going to do within a game will be relatively easy or somewhat manageable to cope with. Yeah.
Do you use anything like MAS to quantify individual?
Not at this point in time. So there's every season we as a staff come together and we look at our processes. Okay, what can we look at going into next season? Is there anything we need to improve? Anything we need to take away? So there's always a review, but at this point in time, there's no mass or anaerobic speed reserve or these type of things in place.
Last question on this. Does the manager or any of his staff have particular runs that they used to do as a player, or they've done over various different seasons with different squads, different players, that they have benchmarks for, that they say, Jermaine, this is my number one run, and I can come out, I can see how people are performing, or we can get a time and we can see where people are at?
Yeah.
Do they have those?
Unfortunately, it don't exist.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and throughout my 4 years or just over 3.5 years at the club, I've not had a coach that's imposed that upon us. At our club philosophy is, the physical department, whether it's first team or youth, we actually have quite a strong voice in terms of and a huge amount of input from a physical point of view. I think maybe it's that Raymond Verheyen and the Dutch, and having a good understanding between technical, tactical, physical, and that blended learning. And so a lot of the Dutch, they see the physical department or the physical coaches as the experts. So we lean on you, But of course, the coaches have their own drills that what they want to see from we call it omschakeling. It's axel decel, or high speed running. Okay, this provokes this, or I love using this rule to get everyone to go, full gas and press, or imposing a shot clock. So yeah, whether they impose a shot clock to drive the intensity within the game, because coaches are very good at seeing or recognizing what they want from their experiences, albeit from a player, if you played at specific levels, or from an outpoint point of view. So every day there's going to be meetings with regards to, okay, did we achieve what we set out in the drill? Okay, this one's great, I banked this. Or okay, wasn't really what I was looking for, or how good I thought it was. What can I do to make it a little bit more intense? But they're always going to have their favorite drills on a conditioning day that we say, okay, I want to push this, and then okay, manipulate the time and the variables to get that. But specific running drills, it's not not like 4 laps around the pitch in 4 minutes. It has to be done, or we go again, or runs are seen as punishment. But I suppose one of my experiences to caveat that is when I started. One of the coaches was used to every Monday 5k run in the woods. So we have we're in the middle of the woods. 5k run in the woods, and then footballing session would start, just to purely get some volume. So when I worked with this particular coach, it was okay. I want to do the 5k run in the woods, and then we come out onto the pitch. So I just asked the reason and the rationale, and that actually came from a physical coach prior. Well, I said, so for me, I'd rather get in the footballing form and maybe disguise it and, get you on the pitch and do some specifics. But time is precious. We was in youth football at the time, so let's use the time a little bit more wisely and get you time on the balls to develop the players in another way. And he was very receptive to that, and that's what we moved on with. But and I do know culturally at some clubs and some organisations there is head coaches which have full run of the program, from physical and technical, and even assistants don't have a say in what goes on. It's this is what we're doing, this is how we're going to do it. But I suppose there's two sides to the coin, because sometimes you might get physical coaches who have, I won't say, a little bit narcissistic and overinflate the importance of their role. So we're going to do all runs because they seem to be doing something. And the other side of the coin, you get coaches who just want to, run guys into the ground. And it's two names come to mind. Conte at the Tottenham at the pre-season, when guys were just absolutely plastered onto the floor, couldn't get up. Recent reports saying that they were doing 2k runs before a match day. Whether there's any truth in that. And Jurgen Klinsmann and the national team in the USA get everyone doing a 25-minute run before breakfast, because that's what he did when he won the World Cup. So you're always going to get those, old school beliefs that come into play. What worked for me is going to work for you, but times are changing. Definitely into a more football periodization or tactical periodization model, and even to the point where UEFA now, they have specific guidelines that if you're doing your coaching badges, you have to undertake some physical elements. So you have more of an awareness. So I do see the next generation of coaches, it's going to be less of the old school runs that are in, a little bit more sound and scientific, because the practitioner, whether it's S&C or sports science, is having more influence on these runs. It's more of the old school traditional coaches that still kind of have that in place, but I do see it will die out slowly but surely.
Nice, mate. Right, 10 to 15 minutes left, and I want to concentrate, maybe go back to where we started, which is the rehab side of things, and give people an insight into your process of rehabbing a hamstring, which, again, whether S&C coaches out there listening are in that position now. If they're not, there will be at some point, because they'll be crowbarred into some part of this process. So would you just give your thought process on your kind of philosophy around dealing with hamstrings, and then we'll go through a kind of day by day, week by week look into it?
Yeah, no problem. Of course, it depends on the injury itself. Is it a grade 1, grade 2, grade 3? Is it proximal, distal? Is it in the muscle belly or within the tendon? Is it a re-injury? Is it the same site? Estimated return to play timelines, and so you're always going to split your rehab up into phases. So for me, I'd always program the sat nav first, so starting from the end and then working back, rather than just being okay, you're in the acute phase and then managing it day by day, so you can have a loose framework. Of course, you cannot talk about rehab without mentioning Matt Taberner and some of the fantastic work that he's done.
Another one. That's the only time we mention him on here.
the brilliant work that he's done with the control chaos continuum. So that's something I do use, and it's a process which, even as a club, everyone knows, the CCC continuum, and what it means. So always starting with the end in mind, program the sat nav. So even from the end criteria is return to play, return to performance. So if we're looking from a testing standpoint, you're going to want all your guys, or the guys that are in the rehab setting, to be minimum at baseline in comparison to contralateral limb. You want to expose them to max velocity in multi-directional chaos, high-end magnitude and density of accels and decels through the full range of the clock, whether that's 45, 90, 135, 180 degrees, curve linear running, various start and end positions. So if that's crudely with the end in mind, to map that and start at the beginning, you enter into your protection phase where it's predominantly physio led. It's looking at, the tissue healing strategies. And then, for my perspective, it's, how early can I get involved in that rehab process? And that is entirely dependent on the practitioner. And again, it will come down to staffing size, injury to rehab ratio, the experience of the physio, competence, ego is within that, and of course trust. So if we know all of these things, I've sometimes been involved in the rehab process from day one, and there's been times where I haven't been in a rehab process until player touches the field. So having those good links between departments, and developing good relationships, does make it easier to take the player through the whole process. So if we're looking at from an exercise point of view, it's making sure, from in the protection phase point of view, it's, can I ensure what can they do? So we work in possibilities. What can the athlete do? We want to readdress their nutritional intake. We want to set them up with an off-peak conditioning program to make sure there's no decrements in performance. And can we train the upper limb? So they're the primary questions which I'm going to be asking, and the process in which I'm going to get put in place. Rehab is predominantly going to be initiated with, like I said, the physio taking, doing your divers, your extenders, your bridges, your isometric type work. And for me, as soon as you can be at a level where you can deliver some isometric strength, I'm going to assess that muscle and see how much force you can produce in comparison to the other limb. So it might not be you go 100%, of course, but even if you're only delivering 20% and that's what you feel comfortable delivering, that's okay. And then we'll track that throughout rehab, looking at your net peak force and time to contraction and some other variables, so we can see when that starts to stabilize, and is the phase and the exit criteria that we're setting, is it in line with what we want to be able to progress? Because the ultimate goal is to bring you back in the fastest yet safest possible way, with minimal chance of reoccurrence. So initiate within the gym. So the protection, primary healing, nutritional strategies, making sure we can develop other limbs and energy system development in a way that's not going to hurt or affect the other limb. Then we go into load introduction, so where we introduce you to key movement patterns. So from here, going through a little bit more extensive type work, more strength type endurance work, and then can we work squat patterns, hinge patterns, go through this, still continuing with some isometric type work. But are we changing lever lengths? Are we changing time under tension? Are we going from bilateral to unilateral? So all these things are going through your mind to, how can we get the most optimal rehab going on? And then progressing that into strength development phase, where we increase the variables to make it, either more load or increase complexity. definitely going into more and more unilateral type training, and then again measuring strength throughout this, and then eventually going into training integration and return to play, and ensuring that you, like I said earlier, going through the full continuum of reactive strength, maximum speed exposure. But everything is going to be progressed in a nice sequential manner, that we're not missing out on any blocks of work. So your running continuum, once I'm going to work from a long to short type approach. So on the field, okay, you might do field lengths at a speed that you may feel comfortable. We might put the restrictions in place, so you might run at 40% of maximum speed. Okay, that goes well. Can we progress that to 50, 60, and so forth before we start to get into the more speed endurance type work, and then eventually bringing you into a phase where speed goes up, so the intensity goes up, but the volume comes down. And then once you're at the end stage, the volume can go up as well as intensity.
So how are you tracking? Just tell us how you're tracking strength through this process. I know you mentioned a few metrics there as well.
Yeah, so tracking strength, so predominantly using the McCall test. Okay. So that's how I initiate my the isometric type work, looking at both 90 degrees and 30 degrees from full extension. So yeah, once you've done this test on, would have your baseline or using the other limb as a reference point, and then track that throughout the rehab to ensure that, one, you're looking at the asymmetry value, but two, the relationship between high speed running and your raw scores. So are you adequately prepared to go out into your run? So I wouldn't expose you to max sprinting until your peak force, your net peak force, was within 10-15%, but it's more that early rate of force development. So net peak force at 100 milliseconds. So those contraction times are linked to top end running foot contacts. So if we've got huge asymmetries in muscle force, depending on the muscle group, at, for example, bicep fem, and you've got huge asymmetries in contraction times in early rate of force development, there's no way that I'm going to let you sprint. Once, because I've seen, from testing this, from screening players, that you can get that down to an acceptable limit where it's sub 10%. So I'm going to push that, and once I feel at a comfortable level, as well as, it's not just a number on the force plate, but as well as seeing you out on the pitch, how you're moving. Do you have good lumbo-pelvic hip control? Do you have good front side and backside mechanics? And do I feel confident enough to expose you to what is deemed highest risk by asking you to sprint maximally? If I've got good lumbo-pelvic hip control, I've got developed front and backside mechanics, whichever one they needed to work on, I'm confident that force, both mean and peak, has good symmetry levels, and early rate of force development / contraction times are good, then it's a green light for me.
How early would you expose? I mean, again, it depends on so many things, but how early would you predominantly introduce like high intensity eccentrics? That would be pretty early. I know there was like Jack Hickey did some work in this particular area.
Yeah, I would go. So after the eccentric isometric phase, in that protection phase, I would once you start to introduce it to load, it's okay. You might do a single leg eccentric slider. So working on that, so getting that eccentric strength, and if that's okay, then okay, I can progress volume on that, and then I can start to increase complexity as well. But ultimately, the end goal is to start doing some, so if we're looking on an isometric continuum, you might do a long lever bridge on the floor, bilateral. So that's like an entry point. But the other end of the spectrum, I want you to be doing some quasi-isometrics where you're, in single leg positions, doing some boss iso switches, some med ball throws in these extended positions. So as well as doing some Swiss ball hamstring tantrums, prone kickers, so that high velocity, eccentric, concentric type work. So if I know that's my end point in a gym point of view, and I've got my start point, it's just following a continuum to make sure that it's seamless transition.
Sounds good. Well, I promise you, I could ask you so many more questions about this process, but I'm just conscious of time, and I promise to keep you well under an hour, which is definitely what I'm going to do. And that's a constraint that I've put on this, by the way, rather than you, because I don't want to completely kill your evening. But I know you said you put stuff on LinkedIn, which is great, and I've noticed that, and some really good stuff, and some good interaction as well, which I think is important, rather than just shoving stuff out there and letting it simmer and letting it go. It's answering questions and things like that, which I think is brilliant. But is there any other platforms that people can get you on if they want to dive into any of the stuff that we've talked about today?
I also have a Twitter, but to be honest, I'm most active now on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Most active on LinkedIn.
Any reason?
No, not really. I suppose, yeah, both as professionals, one another. I stopped using Twitter because you have to
Bishop. It was Bishop, wasn't it?
No, you feel constrained by the amount. Now everything is threads, right? But before, I stopped using it when you only had X amount of sentences that you can use. Whereas, to get into the nuts and bolts and you want to create a little bit more discussion and content, then LinkedIn was a bit more of a free-flowing platform.
Nice, mate. So if people want to get you, LinkedIn is the place to be.
Yeah.
Okay, mate. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Rob.
Really appreciate you coming on at relatively short notice as well, and been open and honest about the stuff that's going on over there. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rob.
Thanks, mate. Speak soon.
Thank you very much. Speak soon.